Let us tell an old story anew, and we will see how well you know it.
Okay. Let's do this.
Let's get one thing straight right now. I am not a fan of the movie Maleficent. I actually saw this sucker when it was in theaters, and as soon as it was over, I knew it would stick with me, calcifying in my cold, icy heart to remain there for all time.
Greedy, bloated goat.
Bloated goat.
And ever since I subjected myself to this abomination, I had made it my goal to one day seek retribution against it.
And now, 5 years later, my time has come at last. And I'm not going to pretend like a lot of my unbridled fury toward this movie doesn't stem from a place of overprotective fanboy nerd rage, because that is definitely a part of it. However,
this film takes a beloved Disney classic, I might go so far as to argue one of the finest films in the entire Disney canon, and just shits all over it.
just diarrhea explosion everywhere.
And while I am thankfully not alone in my contempt towards this atrocity, it still has a surprising number of people that defend it, particularly on the merit of its, feminist themes? Yeah, we'll get to that.
But I'm here to set the record straight and take this dumpster fire to task once and for all. I think I might need something stronger.
Beginning pre-production in the early 1950s after the success of Cinderella, Disney's Sleeping Beauty made its theatrical release in 1959. While reception at the time of its release was decidedly mixed and it disappointed at the box office, this film has seen something of a critical reappraisal in the decades since. In no small part because of Disney's output in the 70s and 80s, which was much worse.
Shanghai, Hong Kong, and Fuyang.
And has gone on to become one of the most iconic films of the entire Disney canon and remains so to this day.
And for good reason.
It's a damn good movie. It makes a lot of subtle changes from the trajectory marked by previous Disney films. The art direction, heavily inspired by medieval tapestries as well as the more modern and graphic style of contemporary animation, is phenomenal, going for a far darker and more stylized aesthetic than any previous Disney film, except maybe Fantasia. It manages to walk a tricky tonal tightrope between dark, gothic fantasy and classic Disney levity.
It looks awful.
That's because it's on you, dear.
Something that the company would struggle with in future films.
Oh, poor miserable Gurgi deserves fierce smackings and whackings on his poor tender head.
Don't jump. Wait. No! No!
And while Aurora continued the trend of Disney princesses generally being the least interesting part of their respective movies, at least they bothered giving the prince a personality this time, and a name, and a horse.
I might have had a small thing for Philip growing up.
No carrots.
No carrots.
But there's one teensy, tiny part of this movie that really stuck with the public consciousness. I am talking, of course, about
Maleficent is the best Disney villain, period. Hell, she's one of the best Disney characters, period. And while her motivations, if you can call them that, are pretty much non-existent, she's basically just a shit-stirring trickster more than anything else, Maleficent proves that sheer screen presence alone can make for a memorable character. Eleanor Audley served as both her voice actor and her performance model, and she imbues the character with such a gleeful disdain for everyone around her. The christening scene in Sleeping Beauty might just be one of the best scenes in any Disney movie, and a lot of it can be chalked up to the performance.
I really felt quite distressed at not receiving an invitation.
You weren't wanted.
Not what? Oh dear, what an awkward situation.
also this.
And all the powers of hell!
That's right, she gets to say hell in a Disney movie, which is a very exclusive club.
Like fire, hellfire.
In the decades since, Maleficent has gone on to be the most enduring element of Sleeping Beauty. She's had the role of major antagonist in the Kingdom Hearts series, a recurring role in House of Mouse, as well as Once Upon a Time and The Descendants, where she's played by Kristen Chenoweth. Okay.
So naturally, when you have a character this enormously popular who has left such an enduring legacy, surely some sort of property must be developed around her. Like, even a feature film with her as a protagonist. As a result, some misguided executive decided, hey, let's take this enormously popular character who is like known and beloved for being a baddie and like the self-proclaimed mistress of all evil. Let's turn her into a misunderstood justice fairy.
Enter Maleficent.
But this whole concept of taking a well-known villain and painting her, because it is usually a she, in a more sympathetic light, it's not without precedent.
Less than a year before the release of Maleficent, Disney did just that with the Snow Queen and Frozen, to major success.
But there's another significant example of this deconstruction that particularly influences Maleficent. Let's talk about Wicked.
The term revisionism, as it pertains to fiction, refers to the retelling of established narratives with significant alterations that deliberately, you guessed it, revise the perspective of the original narrative. This is especially present in historical fiction. Likewise, Game of Thrones can be seen as a revisionist narrative of Tolkien-esque high fantasy. One of my favorite novels, The Song of Achilles, serves as a revisionist telling of the Iliad and focuses on the romance between Patroclus and Achilles. You see this a lot with fairy tales as well, such as in Shrek,
Can't catch me. I'm the gingerbread man. You're a monster.
or Hoodwinked,
And Granny, what big eyes you
Are
have.
we just gonna sit around here and talk about how big I'm getting?
or Happily Never After.
Yo, we're cool. We're on the down low. Way down here, we're slowly, bowly, roly-poly.
Yikes. Written by Gregory Maguire and published in 1995, Wicked, The Life and Times of the Wicked Witch of the West presents a revisionist telling of L. Frank Baum's The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, along with a film adaptation thereof, and serves as an origin story for the Wicked Witch of the West, here named Elphaba. Similar to the basic premise of Maleficent, Wicked portrays Elphaba as a much more sympathetic and complicated figure than her counterparts in either Baum's book or the film adaptation. However, though we see Elphaba's hardships throughout her life and are meant to identify with her, she ultimately still becomes the Wicked Witch of the West that we know and love, and is ultimately doused by Dorothy in a bit of a whoopsie-daisy.
She is a villain, yes, but one born out of tragic circumstance rather than just, for the evils. Nuance.
In contrast, Wicked the Musical takes a much more proto-Elsa approach to the source material, with Elphaba here being more misunderstood than downright evil. But novel or stage show, Wicked the concept works because of its clever utilization and deconstruction of its source material. This is how revisionist narratives work and why they are so appealing to audiences, because they refute common narratives that are comfortable and familiar to us and challenge them. See, it's subversive.
So you really free?
Yes, I was free.
You mean you want to dress like that?
It's edgy.
So you can pretty clearly see the appeal to this approach and where the inspiration for turning Maleficent from conniving antagonist to angsty SJW comes from.
The question is, why does this template work in Wicked, but not in Maleficent?
And this is when we finally start to get to the heart of the issue with this fucking movie.
As I've stated earlier, in both the novel and the musical, Wicked fully utilizes its rich source material to create a new story. It uses several of the elements in Baum's work in the 1939 movie, elements that audiences are already familiar with, but then twists them on their head, creating its own version of its history, politics, and society. Maleficent, not so much.
And the issue stems from the source material, in that there hardly is any.
Sleeping Beauty, being a fairy tale and therefore pretty straightforward, doesn't have nearly as much to expand upon. It's just too simple. So rather than having this rich palette of history and characters to draw from and toy with, the filmmakers would have had to basically start from scratch. This in and of itself isn't necessarily an issue, but that would have been difficult to do, and the filmmakers either weren't clever enough or did not care enough to put in the work to actually flesh out this universe.
But let's take a look at the world building that is done in Maleficent.
We have the realm of humans, which is a vaguely European monarchy. We have the Moors, which are this sort of fairy utopia that has a lot of riches and operates as an egalitarian society with no rulers. At some point in the past, there was a war between humans and fairies, presumably over ownership of the Moors.
And that's it.
Seriously, this is the most copy and pasted fantasy history tropes. Men are bad and greedy and ruin everything. Fairies are good and just want to live in peace with nature. But even then, this potentially juicy idea of the kingdom waging war and colonizing or even genociding the fairies pretty much dissipates around the halfway point in the movie, which does not help with the lack of investment in this world.
Okay, you know what? Fine. It might not be the most interesting of setups, but if that's the only problem, surely this movie can't be so bad. Well, no. I'm only just getting started. The important thing to remember about Wicked is that it is fundamentally, at its core, a new story. An origin story. You know, it's not just The Wizard of Oz with a lazy twist slapped on top.
It isn't until more than halfway through both the book and musical that Dorothy lands her house on the Wicked Witch of the East, ergo setting up the events of the story that we, the audience, are familiar with. Maleficent the film pretends to present itself as a Wicked-style origin story of how Maleficent became the villain that we see in Sleeping Beauty, which, if not very good, would have at least been different.
Except, that's not what we got.
Hell, the origin story is over and done with within the first 30 minutes of the movie. And the whole conflict of the Moors versus the kingdom is basically sidelined halfway through the movie when the focus shifts from being a movie with maybe its own story to tell to just being the literal plot of Sleeping Beauty.
So rather than giving us an origin story on how Maleficent became the antagonist of Sleeping Beauty, instead what we get is just a live-action remake of Sleeping Beauty, but with the crazy twist that Maleficent is no longer the baby-killing mistress of all evil, but a misunderstood justice fairy.
The term Draco in leather pants refers to a phenomenon that occurs in fandom in which a villainous character's flaws are downplayed and are instead portrayed in a much more sympathetic light. The most common targets for Draco in leather pants-ifying are characters who are physically attractive, or have some sort of dark and troubled past that led to their villainy, or sometimes it just comes out of nowhere. Maleficent the movie basically amounts to one big Draco in leather pants fanfic for Maleficent the character. We take one of the most unabashedly evil characters in all of Disneydom and make her an all-loving social justice warrior who fights against the tyrannical humans.
You are no king to me!
And is also the victim of a rape allegory. I mean, a wing dismemberment.
Oh, don't worry, we're getting to that.
The movie tries to have it both ways with her character, making her villainous, but also the hero.
And there's nothing necessarily wrong with that. You know, revisionist narratives are all about deconstruction and undermining the false binary between heroism and villainy. That's a decent way to go about that. Except the movie doesn't commit to that level of moral complexity at all.
Prior to her heel turn, Maleficent is shown to be an all-loving innocent who is like the unofficial leader of the fairies, even though they explicitly say they proudly serve no leader, but okay. She protects the Moors and just wants humans to lead them in peace, but still takes a liking to baby Stefan. And then they fall in love, and then this happens, and then BAM! Evil, vengeance-fueled, mustache-twirling villain. It's just so silly, and it happens within like 5 minutes. I just don't buy it. And it's a big reason why the christening scene is so unbearable in this version, along with the performance. Yeah, I know a lot of the people who are hard on this movie still praise Jolie's acting, and Yeah. Yeah, sorry, I'm firmly not on this bandwagon. She seems to mistake just yelling your lines for actually sounding threatening. They're trying to evoke the haughty, gleefully disdainful Maleficent of the animated film, but this is completely at odds with her characterization and motivation in this film, which established her as a basically good person who's become vengeful and damaged. And then trying to have it both ways just doesn't work at all. A good chunk of the runtime is Maleficent apparently having nothing better to do than tease these poor hapless fairies in some embarrassingly unfunny sequences and help save the child that she sentenced to death from their incompetence, which just adds to the tonal issue, by the by. There's not much to her heel turn because she's apparently not very good at being a villain. Like, from the minute she sees Aurora after the christening, she acts like, ugh, gross, not like, I wish death upon you. Also, they changed the curse she places on Aurora. No longer will she die, she will fall under a...
And fall into a sleep like death!
Okay. Oh, but she also is the one who gives the whole true love's kiss reprieve in this version, because irony. Seriously, Maleficent is so non-committal in her evil, which just adds to the silsil. If you're gonna curse a baby, at least do it right.
The whole curse thing in this version just doesn't really make a lot of sense to begin with.
In the animated film, she curses Aurora because she didn't get invited to a party and because she's just a petty edgelord who just wants to fuck with people. And when you're trying to tell a simple fairy tale, that's all you need, really. But in a film like this, where you're actually giving Maleficent some interiority and attempting some level of moral grayness, we need some motivations. And the motivation becomes revenge against Stefan. And to get revenge on him, she curses his innocent daughter, which... I mean, yeah, that's pretty messed up, but it's not exactly the most logical move and doesn't stop the imminent threat of him taking over the moors. And I would be fine if the film committed to Maleficent's downward spiral of being consumed by revenge and not giving a fuck about the moors or an innocent baby. But the film pretty much forgets this 5 minutes later when she gets all hard-eye emoji towards baby Aurora. Instead of making Maleficent complex, the movie just sands her edges.
But this story still needs a villain, apparently. And since poor maligned Maleficent is now our protagonist, we gots to come up with some villains somehow, even if it's in the most hackneyed, manufactured way possible.
On the flip side of Draco and Leather Pants, we have Ron the Death Eater. For every villain made sympathetic, there's a hero made into an unrepentant jerkass. The three fairies are... Oh god! Oh god! Oh my god! Oh my god! Kill them! Kill them! Kill them with fire! Oh my god!
Anyway.
Okay, so in this version, the three fairies, so named...
I am not grass, I'm little and I'm thistlewit.
Yeah. They have a more explicit history with Maleficent as they all resided in the moors together, yet they also still have this strange rivalry with her.
She's always in a hurry with her big wings.
Again, this worked in the original because Maleficent was, you know, evil. But here they start out on the same side. But eventually they try to form an alliance with the humans.
They are also possibly the worst part of a film already brimming with bad ideas, and they are awful and I hate them.
This is a far cry from the 1959 version in which, while, yes, fairly incompetent at the whole child-rearing thing, they have nothing but good intentions and clearly want the best for Aurora. Also, they were actually funny and charming, not annoying, and so deep in the uncanny valley. Hate!
Also, just quick side note, the three fairies in the 1959 film were essentially the protagonists.
And this is what they were reduced to in 2014.
But oh, there's more.
Prince Philip isn't so much villainized as he's just made completely useless.
But I'm on my way to King Stefan's castle and I've become hopelessly lost.
And I know that I was like kind of joking earlier when I was talking about Philip, but he really doesn't get enough credit for being one of the early princes to actually have a personality.
No carrots.
And while he isn't the most proactive character in the original, he at least does some things. He kills the dragon! Yeah, we'll get to the fucking dragon. Instead, in this film, he has absolutely nothing to do. Seriously, he spends the majority of the film unconscious for... some reason. He is also completely robbed of his motivation in the original film, in which he goes to Stefan's castle to marry Aurora, whom he meets on the way under the pseudonym Briar Rose. Here, he's just... go into the castle. Because... Also, Aurora just gives him her name, and I guess he's too dumb to put two and two together. Who knows?
But these examples pale in comparison to the outright character assassination that poor King Stefan is subjected to.
In Sleeping Beauty, King Stefan is not really that interesting. He seems like a nice enough guy. He clearly cares about Aurora's well-being, and he continues to bankroll this minstrel dude despite him clearly having a drinking problem. But he doesn't have a whole lot of characterization outside of a really fun scene where he gets completely shit-faced with Philip's father and aforementioned alcoholic minstrel.
So there was a lot of room to give this character, you know, more dimension and depth. And yet...
In Maleficent, Stefan is a horrible SOB who basically loses all sympathy 15 minutes into the movie. I mean, they kinda try to make him sympathetic with this whole, oh, I'm an orphan, I live in a barn backstory.
My parents are dead. Mine too.
But once he becomes king, his sense of morality just goes out the window, which makes his whole conflict and relationship with Maleficent kinda really hollow. And I get it, fairy tales don't usually have a lot of nuance in their characters' psychologies, but this film is supposedly trying to buck the moral simplicity of the original fairy tale by making Maleficent a sympathetic character and deconstruct the story we all know. So why not take a similar opportunity to explore Stefan more? But instead it's just the opposite of the Maleficent problem. She's turned into a boring one-note good guy, he's turned into a boring one-note villain. Also his accent.
Maleficent! Maleficent!
Oh, but it's even worse as a kid.
Maleficent! Maleficent!
Yeah, this might just be the worst performance in the movie.
And it's not even the fact that he's turned into an outright villain in this version that bothers me. Although it is, you know, lame. It's just that his motivation is so flimsy.
We understand that his greatest folly is his ambition and that this is traced back to his humble origins. But we get all of this in about a line of dialogue. Then he goes from tragic figure to morally bankrupt villain in about 5 minutes within the first half hour of the movie.
Surely there was some way to make him more compelling, like maybe he really is a royal and so he falls in love with Maleficent and then, you know, but this kingdom, they like need resources from the Moors because the people are starving and so they need the riches of the Moors so their people don't have to starve. And then he's like, you know, caught between his loyalty to his kingdom but his love for Maleficent. He has to choose and it's like a hard choice that he has to make. Or something. I mean, it's better than what they came up with.
But that would mean making a character with some moral ambiguity, so instead I guess we could just make him a dick.
Arrested by the Queen?
Leave me.
Sire, she is not well. The nurses are fearful that she won't make it through the night.
See, he doesn't even care about his dying wife because he's just so obsessed with finding Maleficent.
Okay, you know what? I'm actually going to take a second to talk about the dying wife because this actually really bothers me.
I don't even have a mom!
Neither do we!
Sleeping Beauty was the rare Disney movie in which the mother isn't dead. I mean, she contributes fuck all to the plot, but she was still there, and she had a line or two.
And you're not offended, Your Excellency?
Oh no!
But nope, Maleficent undoes this and has her succumb to a fever, because it's always some sort of fever.
See, with Maleficent being turned into a mother figure in this version, there's just not enough room for the bio mom. So she's gotta go.
Ugh. All the supporting characters are either made eviler, stupider, uselesser, or deader. All so that Maleficent can look better in comparison and steal the spotlight consistently.
But maybe the most frustrating part of Stefan as a character is that his relationship with Maleficent just isn't terribly well explored.
Because he has no redeeming qualities and we hardly see their relationship play out, it's really difficult to feel any sense of investment or betrayal when, uh-oh, he does the bad. But instead of, you know, showing us that relationship, let's just leave it up to the narrator to give us the broad strokes over a montage. Not even a very long montage.
They spoke of many things, and the years faded away.
Would have been nice to hear, like, just one of those things. There's also just no chemistry between these two at all. Oh, the burning passion.
So, I guess now is as good a time as any to talk about the catalyst for the whole plot of this movie. Strap in.
Alright, let's get this out of the way. Let's start with that one scene. So what is the catalyst for Maleficent's turn to darkness? After the king is, fatally injured in his battle with her, he asks for his counsel to avenge him to earn the throne.
Who among you is worthy? Kill the winged creature. Avenge me. And upon my death, you will take the crown.
Lean in, Stefan. So Stefan goes back to the moors, and after some brief hostility, they go back to rekindling their old flame, schmoozing all over each other. Then he slips her a fantasy date rape drug and decides he can't kill her, so instead he violently severs her wings from her to become king.
I have avenged you, sire.
And then Maleficent wakes up the next morning in a daze and reacts like this.
Yikes.
So Word of God has stated that yes, this was intended to be a rape allegory. In an interview, Jolie stated, "We were very conscious, the writer Linda Wolverton and I, that this scene was a metaphor for rape." Which, if you give more than a moment's thought, is pretty radical for a Disney film, metaphorical or no. But like any on-screen depiction of violence against women, particularly sexualized violence, it proved divisive. Some people praised it, others thought it was tasteless and unnecessary, with Lindy West writing for Jezebel, who actually liked the movie, calling it groaningly cheap and clumsy. Rape as a storytelling device is common because it's a very serious topic and is capable of eliciting very strong emotions. For the same reason, it's also hack writing 101 to create cheap drama and motivation.
And to the film's credit, the inclusion of a rape allegory in a feminist revisionist telling of Sleeping Beauty is not that outlandish, because it's in the source material.
In the original Charles Perrault version, Beauty wakes up to find she's been raped in her sleep, and had a couple babies in the process. Big yike. But even the Disney version still has the princess kissed in her sleep without consent, something that is, at the very least, questionable by today's standards and a clear violation of one's bodily autonomy.
So there is a world in which a darker and edgier version of Sleeping Beauty uses rape or an allegory thereof. The problem is, who wants to see this in a movie focused on Maleficent?
Did anyone really think, gee, I sure love Maleficent, she's such a baddie, I'd love it if her backstory was that she was assaulted and that's how she became the mistress of all evil? And as soon as it's over, the film doesn't really bother dealing with it in any substantial way. Instead, it's just Disney's version of I spit on your grave. Even ignoring the fact that Maleficent doesn't become this big bad mistress of all evil, the motivation for her heel turn and baby cursing being a date rape fantasy equivalent is just tacky. But she gets her wings back at the end, so I'm not sure what this means for the metaphor, but there you go.
But that's not all the feminism we got in this movie.
Take, for instance, the scene where they try to wake Aurora with that goddamn true love's kiss, and the kiss that wakes her is not from Prince Useless, but
Hello, Godmother.
A lady? Where have I seen this before?
Ah, there it is. Yep, they pull the same goddamn twist used in Frozen literally less than a year ago.
No true love.
You know, you can only subvert this true love trope so many times, Disney. You know, just because it's a lady kissing her doesn't make it any more consensual. You know what? Never mind.
But what's frustrating is, despite its feminist themes, there's a startling dearth of likable female characters in this movie.
As if having another competent woman would detract from the badassery that is Maleficent. We can't have anyone stealing the spotlight. That means we'd get less of Angelina Jolie doing, whatever this is. The closest we get is Aurora, who, yeah, is a fine character, but she's also, like her animated counterpart, basically impotent and never at any point has any sense of narrative agency, usually as a result of Maleficent's actions. Meanwhile, the three fairies are duplicitous and petty and have beef with Maleficent because women, am I right? And the queen dead after one scene. But even more frustrating is to compare this to, yes, the animated film, which had 3 likable and competent female protagonists in addition to legendary badass Maleficent.
And you might be thinking, are you seriously trying to make the case that the original Sleeping Beauty is somehow more feminist than Maleficent is? And no, not really.
Any progressive notions in Sleeping Beauty are likely unintended, and it still has some pretty traditional ideas on gender. Maleficent, well, it's trying to go for some sort of feminist theme, and the inclusion of having a rape allegory, while I do consider it a net negative, is a gutsy move.
However,
the fact remains that we went from having 3 female protagonists with goals and motivations driven not by a man, but by their love for a child, to 1 female protagonist who is driven by her love for a child, but also vengeance towards a man. See, there's this castle where she hangs out for like, I don't know, 5 minutes. We have no idea what it is, or hell, even where it is, but it's an obvious nod to Sleeping Beauty and the castle Maleficent actually, you know, lives in for the duration of that film. But here it's just this location that's shoehorned in only as a way of saying, hey, remember this? This doesn't become her new hideout or some location that will become plot relevant later on. It's just pointless homage for the sake of homage because 5 minutes later she goes back to the moors and this castle is never seen again. And then we have the song that plays as the credits roll. Sound familiar?
I know you, I walked with you once upon a dream.
Yep, it's Once Upon a Dream from the original.
I know it's true that visions are seldom all they seem.
And it's sung by Lana Del Rey. Okay, why is it playing here? Who knows?
like, this has absolutely nothing to do with the movie. It's not a musical, so there's no reason for this song to be in it. And it's not, like, a little tied into the plot at all. It's not like a lullaby that Maleficent sings to Aurora, or like Aurora doesn't hum it at any point. Like, it just has absolutely nothing to do with the movie.
It's just here because it's a well-known song from the original, but I guess we need something to fill up the credits and something to sell to the gays on iTunes, so here you go.
But by far the biggest offender is the christening scene.
It's almost completely lifted from the 1959 version, nearly word for word even, but it falls flat for a number of reasons, the biggest being, again, because of this version's Maleficent herself.
I must say, I really felt quite distressed at not receiving an invitation.
Really, it's a setup leading to this moment that undercuts the weight of this scene, because Maleficent isn't the villain in this movie. We know she's not this vain, petty elitist that this scene makes her out to be, so it really just feels completely out of character.
Royalty, nobility, the gentry, and how quaint.
Even the rebel.
It goes back to her heel turn just not being in the slightest convincing. This scene takes so much from the original, but the context of the scene and the character's motivations are completely different, so it does not and cannot have the same impact. But even cinematically, this scene is just so flaccid and boringly shot. Like, God, this entrance is weak. Do you remember her entrance in the original? Let's compare. Here there's just like a gust of wind and then her shadow, and then she's just walking through the crowd. She just walks in despite pointedly not receiving an invitation. You really should invest in some new guards, Stefan, because they clearly do not take their job seriously. And then this maniacal laughter that happens off screen, like, Like, what? That is not Angelina Jolie's laugh.
Oh, and the dragon. Yep. We are finally going to talk about the dragon.
Into a dragon.
I honestly don't really have much to say about this. I hate it. It sucks. It is self-evidently awful. Not only is one of the most badass iconic Maleficent moments, one of the most iconic moments in all of Disneydom, taken from her and given to what amounts to an original character, this has got to be the most ineffectual dragon ever. Kill them! Why aren't you killing them? But again, the dragon was in the original, so I guess we have to include it here, even if it doesn't work at all.
And to be clear, there's nothing wrong with homage or allusion, but to be effective, it has to be done with intent, and the intent can't just be, hey, remember the thing. I mean, I guess it can, but it sucks and I hate it.
Unfortunately, that's pretty much all this film does, over and over. It constantly preys on your nostalgia by evoking narrative and visual elements of the 1959 film, but has no idea how to recontextualize them in a clever or interesting way.
So just putting aside the frustrating revisions, the lifeless script, the unlikable characters, and the tonal mess, this movie just isn't very fun to watch.
We go from shitty set piece to shitty set piece, each one filled to the brim with CGI clusterfucks. The world of this film is just so anonymous, it feels like fantasy pastiche with no distinct style to prop it up. Say what you will about the 1959 film, but it at least had a look. There's certainly none of the gothic darkness of that film here. Really, there's no distinguishing aesthetic here at all aside from the scraps of imagery lifted from the original. All the fairy creatures are hideous. Nothing about this world feels real, it all feels incredibly manufactured. The action sequences are poorly thought out and uninteresting. Apparently the king's bones are made of styrofoam because this fatally wounds him. Yeah, I'm just gonna touch you. Or this awful scene where Maleficent plays bumper cars with these soldiers.
But by far my favorite bad shot in this movie has gotta be this one.
Where she establishes her dominion over the Moors, sits upon her throne, and forces all, 12 of her goofy-looking subjects to bend the knee. What a ruthless despot. And what the fuck, there's that laugh again!
Oh, there's just so much to hate.
Maleficent was directed by Robert Stromberg in his directorial debut, who took the reins after Tim Burton dropped out early in pre-production. Prior to his work on Maleficent, he had worked as art director on Avatar, but also Alice in Wonderland and Oz the Great and Powerful.
I want him to see me like this. I want him to know that he was the one who made me this way.
Yeesh. The lattermost bears the closest resemblance to Maleficent, both in terms of its storytelling, another weak sauce origin story of a beloved classic, and its fantasy mishmash art direction, and that is not a compliment.
Okay, so in the interest of at least pretending to appear fair and balanced, there are some things in this movie that do work. So here are those 2.5 things.
Thing number 1. Half. Aurora in this version actually is something resembling a character and not just a sexy lamp. And while the bar was admittedly low considering her predecessor, there's really not much to fault about Elle Fanning's performance. She also actually looks like a real 16-year-old girl as opposed to a Dawson Creek 16-year-old, so that's something. Also, her reaction where she's like, "You lied to me," to the three fairies is much more realistic in this film, instead of just being upset that she can't bang that boy she just met.
We've met before.
You have.
Where? Once upon a dream.
Right. Well, instead she's just angry that she's been lied to and is, cursed. This is an improvement. Unfortunately, she's about the only character who goes relatively unfucked in this train wreck. We gotta count our blessings in a movie like this. I know I ragged on Angelina Jolie's acting earlier, and I do stand by that. But credit where credit is due, she does sell it in this scene. And like a lot of people, I actually kind of like Diaval, even though he obviously only exists so that 60% of this film isn't just Angelina Jolie walking around by herself on a soundstage somewhere. Taking the Raven from the original film and turning him into a fleshed out character, that's like kinda an interesting idea, one of the only clever adaptive changes in this movie. But mostly I just begrudge him for the fact that he steals one of the most iconic Maleficent moments from her.
Into a dragon.
Lame. Some of the art direction is on the okay side of eh. Some of the cinematography is decent. Also, there's this tree man. I like this tree man.
Don't listen to him, Balthazar. You're classically handsome.
And that's it. So in conclusion, alcohol does make everything better.
Honestly, having watched this movie way more times than I would have liked solely in the name of making this video, you're welcome. I kind of feel bad ragging on it this hard. Sure, it's a shameless studio cash grab, but no more than any other summer blockbuster. You can tell that people in front of and behind the camera did care about this movie-ish. And even its attempt at feminist themes, while bungled and not good in my opinion, seems sincere enough. But then again, this movie made over $240 million domestically and $750 million internationally, so fuck it. Maleficent tries to pay homage to a Disney classic, but instead only capitalizes on its legacy, fully misunderstanding the appeal of that film and why it is so revered to this day. It attempts to subvert and deconstruct fairy tale tropes, but is too lazy and unambitious to do any of the real work that entails. It presents itself as a revisionist narrative, but it still relies on a familiar and comfortable narrative of good versus evil with some corporate-approved feminism slapped on top to keep up with the times. It takes a character beloved for her malicious nature and strips her of everything that made her such a cultural icon to begin with. But worst of all is the precedent this movie set for soulless, big-budget remakes of beloved Disney properties that feel obligated to outsmart and fix their source material in the most cynical ways, all while preying on the nostalgia of audiences for years to come.
And that is why this movie is the worst, and I hate it. You know, maybe now, after all these years, I can just finally move on with my life and put this whole movie behind me.
Don't ruin my morning.